Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Sherry. Over the past several weeks, I have discussed some of the more technical aspects of property management. People always say to me that I must have something interesting in terms of stories to tell them, so I thought I would share this one, and I'm going to call it The Naked Truth About Property Management. Several years ago, I received a phone call from my caretaker, and it was on the morning of Christmas Eve. We managed a seniors high-rise in the West End, and many of the tenants became confused or scared quite easily. On this particular occasion, there was a burst pipe in the suite of an elderly lady, and she was refusing entry to the building manager. The manager had called me because the elderly lady was convinced that if she opened the door, both the caretaker and the plumber were going to attack and rape her. No amount of talking was going to convince her otherwise, and she had actually barricaded the door. While the caretaker was trying to convince her to open the door, water was now beginning to leak into several of the suites below, and the caretaker was beginning to receive telephone calls from the tenants in those suites below as well. He called me at the office asking what to do. We advised him that this was a serious emergency and that if she didn't cooperate, he would just have to remove the door and to gain access that way. I gave him instructions to ensure that when he entered the suite, the female assistant manager be in attendance as well, in order to calm down the tenant. I asked them to call me back with the results. A short time later, the caretaker called me back, giving me the results, and they're not what I had expected. He said that the tenant had agreed to open the door, but when she did, she was standing there completely naked, and she was refusing to get dressed. At this time, both the caretaker and the plumber refused to go into the suite, and meanwhile, the burst pipe was still leaking and flooding all the suites below. It took some negotiation, but we finally managed to persuade the elderly tenant to get dressed. The plumbers went in and fixed the leak, the restoration company was called, and the water was cleaned up and the damage repaired. Later on that day, a colleague of mine dropped into my office to wish me Merry Christmas and say goodbye before going home for the holidays. As I was on the telephone, he just plopped down on a chair in my office. I was on the telephone with my caretaker getting a final status report on the incident. While I was talking to my caretaker, I just casually asked if the elderly tenant was still naked or if she had gotten dressed. My colleague looked up at me in surprise, and when I got off the phone, he asked me, "What kind of building are you managing?" I guess the moral of the story is property managers need to expect the unexpected. They need to be tactful negotiators, and we deal with these situations so that landlords don't have to. Hopefully this has been a fun and interesting story for everybody to hear. This is Rod Fram for Radio Real Estate.